Hey guys, tonight we're heading straight into the wildest courtroom drama you've never heard of, where the defendants don't wear suits, they wear fur, feathers, and occasionally a very guilty expression. That's right. Tonight, you're about to experience the soothing, ridiculous, and historically accurate world of medieval animal trials. Yes, real animals on trial for actual crimes. If you've ever worried your dog would rat you out, imagine a world where your neighbor's pig could be sentenced to death by hanging for stealing a turnip, or your rooster hauled in front of the judge for crowing at unholy hours. It's not a joke, it's history, and it's about to be the most absurd night of legal proceedings since someone tried to copyright the word "the." So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that gentle white noise, and get comfortable. Maybe tuck your toes in, just in case the mice have a lawyer tonight. Let's get curious for a second. What did a pig have to do to get the death penalty in 1386? Was there a defense lawyer for the local goat? How does one cross-examine a chicken without getting pecked? And would you, personally, survive being judged by a panel of barnyard animals? Would your dog have an alibi? How do you sentence a locust to exile? And most importantly, if your cow was accused of witchcraft, how would you plead? These are the pressing questions that medieval courts, in all their smoky, candlelit glory, actually tried to answer. Congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1474. You are in a tiny European village. Your neighbor's rooster is on trial for disturbing the peace. The judge looks suspiciously like he hates ducks, and everyone in town is here to watch the drama. Welcome to the world's most bizarre legal system. Good luck. The village square is packed. You stand shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, craning your neck for a glimpse of the defendant. A rather hefty pig, snout dusted with mud, chained to a wooden post. The bailiff shouts for order, while the pig, clearly unimpressed, roots around for snacks. In this surreal courtroom, justice is about to be served, preferably with applesauce. It's a spectacle unlike anything you've seen outside a family reunion gone wrong. The air is thick with anticipation, the sharp scent of straw, and the occasional whiff of something distinctly porcine. Children jostle for a better view, mothers clutch their shawls, and the baker from down the road makes a killing selling yesterday's bread to anyone needing a snack. Someone is already taking bets on the outcome. Next to you, old man Henrik mutters that he always knew that pig was trouble. You try to imagine explaining this scene to your friends back home. Except you are home, and you're now reconsidering your stance on vegetarianism. The judge, resplendent in a robe that has seen better centuries, bangs his staff for silence. His hat, somewhere between a wizard's and a chef's, wobbles as he surveys the crowd with all the gravitas of a man who takes farmyard crime very seriously. On his left sits the town scribe, quill at the ready, already struggling to keep a straight face. On his right, a local priest clutches a small bottle of holy water, because you never know when a pig might also be possessed. You, somehow, have ended up with a front row seat. Maybe you're here out of morbid curiosity. Maybe because your cousin's best friend's goat was a suspect last week. Or maybe you just wanted to see if justice really is blind, or merely short-sighted and slightly muddy. One thing is certain. The pig, blissfully unaware of its legal peril, has found a small beetle and is determined to make a meal of it before sentencing. The proceedings begin, and the bailiff, whose main qualification appears to be loudest lungs in the county, calls the court to order. The prosecutor, a wiry man with an unfortunate mustache and a flair for melodrama, stands to make his opening remarks. Your Honor, esteemed townsfolk, and honorable members of the livestock community, already you're in uncharted territory. He launches into a passionate account of the pig's alleged crimes, rooting up Farmer Mickle's garden, trampling young cabbages, and, in a moment that brings gasps from the crowd, devouring the last apple tart before Michaelmas. The pig, for its part, responds by emitting a noise that can only be described as a legal objection, followed by a determined effort to gnaw on the bailiff's boot. This does little to help its case, but wins it a few fans in the back row, where local children are now cheering for the defence. Speaking of the defence, a weary-looking notary stands to present the pig's side. "Ladies and gentlemen," he begins, "my client is a humble creature, driven by instinct and an admirable dedication to the pursuit of snacks." He gestures at the pig, who is now attempting to eat the evidence, an apple core. Can we truly judge a pig for being a pig? Would you punish a goose for honking, or a cow for mooing at dawn? The argument is met with murmurs, some sympathetic, others deeply skeptical, especially from those who lost their carrots last Tuesday. As the trial continues, witnesses are called. Farmer Mickle, who delivers a moving, if slightly exaggerated, account of cabbage carnage. Young Greta, who claims the pig winked at her menacingly. The crowd gasps again. And the town baker, who seems mainly concerned that the pig never paid for the tart. Each testimony is more colourful than the last, with the judge occasionally forced to restore order when passions flare and a chicken briefly escapes its pen, causing chaos in the peanut gallery. Through it all, the pig remains an island of calm. Every so often, it lets out a contented grunt, as if to say, "Guilty or not, at least I got the apple." You, meanwhile, can't help but wonder, how did anyone ever think this was a good use of a Thursday? By the end of opening arguments, the crowd is split. Some demand justice, others plead for mercy, and a few are just hoping for a more entertaining defendant next time. Maybe a particularly rowdy duck. But for tonight, the pig's fate hangs in the balance, somewhere between absurdity and history. One thing is certain. You will never look at a courtroom or a pork chop the same way again. You squint through the jostling crowd, trying to make sense of the next case. The sun glints off the courthouse window, well, technically a plank nailed to a slightly larger plank, and there, tethered with all the dignity of a visiting dignitary, stands the next defendant, a donkey. Yes, a real, living, braying donkey. Its ears twitch nervously, and every so often it lets out a mournful hee-haw, as if rehearsing for its big moment under oath. You might be wondering how you ended up in a place where donkeys need legal representation. The short answer: welcome to the logic of medieval Europe. A world where if it moved, ate, made noise, or stepped in the wrong direction, it could find itself before the judge. The long answer? No one actually knows, but everyone is too invested in the outcome to ask questions. The judge, who by now has transitioned smoothly from pig trial solemnity to donkey case gravitas, bangs his staff and calls the court to order. "The matter before us," he intones, "is that of Bartholomew, the donkey, accused of wanton destruction of property, late-night braying, and inciting unrest among the hens." There's a collective shuffling as people crane for a better look. Someone in the back is already muttering that the rooster should be next. In the modern world, you might handle such things with a stern look and a reinforced fence. In medieval times, full legal proceedings. The logic, such as it is, goes like this. Animals, as God's creatures, can choose to do right or wrong. If a donkey eats your beets or tramples your leeks, it's not just an accident. It's a moral failing. And since you can't very well write it a stern letter or take away its iPad privileges, you march it to court. Simple. You lean closer as the donkey's owner, Master Willem, pleads his beast's case. He insists Bartholomew is a model donkey, unfairly blamed for crimes that might just as easily have been committed by a jealous sheep or a rogue goose. The prosecutor, not to be outdone, produces an actual diagram of trampled vegetables, a handful of mangled carrots, and, for dramatic effect, a torn cabbage leaf. "Exhibit A, Your Honor," he declares, holding the evidence at arm's length as if it might bite. The scribe scribbles furiously, doing his best to keep up with the legal fireworks. The donkey, for its part, looks about as interested in its fate as a cat at bath time. It occasionally swishes its tail, stamps a hoof, and tries to chew the corner of the prosecutor's tunic when he's not looking. The crowd is riveted. Justice, they feel, must be seen to be done, even if the defendant can't spell guilty. Here's where things get weird, even by medieval standards. The donkey is assigned a legal advocate, usually the village notary, whose only reward is that he can later tell his grandchildren he once defended livestock. He stands, clears his throat, and launches into a heartfelt defense. "My client is a humble beast, driven by hunger and perhaps a love of midnight singing. But can we blame him for following the instincts bestowed upon him by his creator? Would any one of us, locked in a pen next to a field of ripe vegetables, not make the same choices?" The logic is flexible, but then so are medieval courts. It's less about guilt and more about the performance. The village needs a villain for its ruined harvest, and today Bartholomew draws the short straw. Testimonies follow. Farmer Elsie claims she saw the donkey with intent in his eyes, while little Hugo insists the donkey brayed so loudly one night it scared the moon behind a cloud. The priest is called, just in case the donkey is possessed. He mutters a prayer and sprinkles a few drops of holy water. The donkey sneezes, and so it goes. You, meanwhile, find yourself thinking about your own neighbor's lawn-mowing habits. Would they survive a medieval tribunal? The answer is almost certainly no. As the session wraps, the judge promises a verdict after due consideration and a hearty lunch. Justice, medieval style, slow, hungry, and more than a little ridiculous. If logic seems missing, that's because here, it's always on trial too. In the end, you can't help but respect the system. It's equal parts theater, therapy, and very public venting, like the comments section before the internet. And as the donkey is led away, you find yourself hoping it at least gets a good meal out of the experience. In medieval logic, that's about as close as anyone gets to justice. The next case is announced with a mix of dread and giddy anticipation. A sow, accused of the worst offense possible, murder. That's right. You shift on your feet, half expecting someone to clarify that the victim was, perhaps, a cabbage. But no, the charges are read out, and it is indeed a human, which, in medieval legal terms, is the absolute gold standard of barnyard scandal. You lean in as the crowd murmurs. Some people clutch their rosaries, others their wallets. Kids are scolded for asking loud questions like, "Did she use a weapon?" Or will they hang her by the tail? The village gossips, always quick to pivot, start whispering about last winter's goose trial, as if murder is contagious among livestock. Medieval animal crimes range from the laughably petty to the astonishingly grim. Pigs, resourceful, stubborn, and notoriously omnivorous, are the prime offenders. If a pig got loose and, say, bit a child or trampled an old man's foot, the legal gears spun into motion. Never mind that children regularly bit each other and old men tripped over everything. The moment a pig did it, it was criminal. The idea of criminal intent was suspiciously flexible. You might get the impression that pigs were always scheming, biding their time until the right cabbage or the wrong peasant crossed their path. But pigs are only the beginning. Goats, as the records show, were prosecuted for indecent conduct. This covered everything from destroying property, read eating someone's laundry, To public lewdness, goats will be goats, to being simply unruly. If your goat escaped its pen and introduced itself to the bishop's ceremonial vestments, expect a summons. The indignity of the bishop, the goat, and the vestments all being present in the same room is almost enough to make you switch religions. Then there are cows, accused of breaking fences and trespassing. Chickens are brought in for theft, the crime being egg-laying in the wrong yard. One infamous rooster was charged for crowing at unholy hours, apparently waking the local magistrate from a particularly bad dream. Even dogs, the supposed best friends of man, were indicted for attacking livestock or barking during church services. You find yourself quietly grateful your own pets have never been forced to explain their behavior to a judge, though the cat would probably do just fine. Of course, the villagers don't stop at the obvious suspects. Swarms of locusts were hauled to court. Well, not literally, but they were summoned by proclamation and excommunicated when they failed to appear. Rats, weevils, and sometimes wolves faced mass indictments. The logic? If you could name it, you could accuse it. And if you could accuse it, you could drag it before the authorities and demand vengeance, or at least closure. Testimony is often a highlight of these trials. Witnesses swear they saw the accused acting suspiciously near the scene of the crime, or recall the goat eyeballing Mrs. Clerval's undergarments before their mysterious disappearance. Evidence is whatever the community agrees is evidence. Hoofprints near a garden, a feather left behind, or a suspiciously muddy snout. At no point does anyone pause to wonder if perhaps the legal system is just a little outmatched by the cunning of farm animals. But the real star is the public's appetite for spectacle. These are more than just legal proceedings. They are community theatre with real stakes. Everyone has an opinion, and everyone has a story about a hen that pecked the mayor's hat or a ram that once escaped justice by jumping a fence. By the end, you're left with one nagging thought. For every animal on trial, there's a human or two who probably should be. But in the medieval world, animals make the best scapegoats, literally. And so, from murderous sows to indecent goats, justice marches on, hoof by hoof and feather by feather, in the world's most unlikely court. The moment the bell tolls for the next session, you feel the energy change. It's time for the real stars of the show to make their entrance. The judge, the jury, and the odd cast of spectators, both human and animal. If you've ever wondered how many people it takes to convict a sheep, or how many ducks it takes to disrupt a trial, tonight's your answer. The judge is first to appear. He strides in with all the dignity his moth-eaten robes and perpetually lopsided wig can muster. This is a man who has spent years pretending to be wise, stern, and above it all, but who secretly lives for days like this. His gavel is a carved stick from the old apple tree. His bench creaks ominously, as if warning him to lay off the cheese. He clears his throat and attempts to look impartial, but everyone knows he's still mad about the pig that bit his boot last winter. Flanking the judge are the jurors, a lineup that would not look out of place in a local tavern brawl. You count at least one blacksmith, 2 bakers, the miller's wife, famous for her stubbornness, and Farmer Oscar, whose hearing is so bad he's just here for the snacks. Their only qualifications are availability, a willingness to miss work, and a passing dislike of the defendant's owner. Nobody is quite sure how they were selected, but everyone knows you want to stay on their good side, especially if you own a goose. Once everyone is seated, except the animals, who are already restlessly moving about, the judge calls the court to order, rapping his stick so hard a cloud of dust erupts from the bench. "All rise for the Honourable Court of Village Justice," he bellows, as if he's never before had this much power. The crowd, half standing, half laughing, tries to comply. In the back, someone's sheep gets loose and immediately heads for the table of exhibits, which currently features 3 wilted carrots and a feather duster labelled critical evidence. The barnyard spectators, meanwhile, provide running commentary. Cows low in the distance, A gaggle of geese honk and waddle around, already plotting a jailbreak. The village dogs sniff hopefully at unattended lunches. Chickens flutter nervously from one fence post to another, perhaps sensing that today's courtroom drama might end with a verdict against poultry. The human audience is no less dramatic. Old women knit and whisper predictions. Children climb on barrels to get a better look. The town drunk provides unsolicited legal advice to the prosecutor. Every so often, the judge has to pause to shoo away a goat that is chewing the prosecutor's notes, or to tell a child to please, for the love of Street Hubert, stop poking the evidence. The judge attempts to read the charges in his best royal decree voice, but he's interrupted by the jury's loud debate over whether the donkey on trial last week ever paid his fine. Farmer Oscar, woken by the commotion, asks if there will be refreshments. The scribe sighs and scribbles in the margins, proceedings delayed due to chicken. In this court, law is less a matter of legal precedent and more a performance, a collective act of catharsis for villagers sick of cabbage thefts and midnight braying. The judge, the jury, and every onlooker are here for the ritual, the gossip, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone else's animal will be the next to stand accused. There's little order, even less decorum, and a strong sense that this is less about justice and more about making it through another year with something to laugh about. By the end of the day, everyone, judge, jury, and barnyard spectators alike, will have their say whether the case is solved or not. But that's how justice works here. Noisy, messy, occasionally covered in feathers, and exactly as it should be. The courtroom is in a state of barely controlled chaos. The defendant, today a sheep with an expression best described as innocent but confused, stands tied to a post. The crowd is restless, the jury is munching on stale bread, and the judge is already regretting his life choices. The prosecution has delivered its thunderous opening, blaming the sheep for everything from eating Master Ulrich's prized turnips to disturbing the moral fibre of the youth. All eyes now turn to the animal's only hope, the defense attorney. If you expected a high-priced city-slicker lawyer in a silk robe, think again. The defense is usually a local notary, a down-on-his-luck apprentice, or the one literate person who happened to draw the short straw that morning. Today's champion is Master Torben, a man whose legal experience mostly involves reading out loud at church and occasionally drafting receipts for cheese. He rises from his seat, clutching a stack of papers so thin they might actually be someone's shopping list. The courtroom hushes. Sensing this is the main event, everyone loves a good underdog, even when the underdog is literally a sheep. Master Torben clears his throat, bows to the judge, and addresses the court with a gravity usually reserved for funerals and lost hats. Honored judge, esteemed jury, and respected participants, he begins, scanning the room and pointedly ignoring the goat chewing his sleeve. We are gathered here to determine the fate of one who cannot speak in his own defense. One who stands accused not out of malice, but out of hunger, confusion, and frankly, very poor fencing. His argument is part theatre, part therapy, and 100% desperate. Yes, the sheep did eat turnips. Yes, he did wander into Master Ulrich's garden. But can we blame a creature whose only crime is being a sheep? He gestures dramatically to the defendant, who chooses that moment to bleat and attempt to sit down. If we start punishing animals for being animals, where will it end? Shall we fine the clouds for raining on laundry day? Shall we bring the moon to trial for keeping us awake? The jury is riveted. The judge strokes his beard. The prosecution rolls his eyes so hard you can hear it. Meanwhile, in the audience, old Mother Marin dabs her eyes, perhaps moved by the speech or simply overcome by sheep dander. Master Torben continues, his voice now trembling with passion and perhaps a hint of hay fever. Let us not forget, good people, that sheep are the lifeblood of this village. They clothe us, feed us, and occasionally entertain us with their escape attempts. To condemn this sheep is to condemn ourselves, to admit that, Given the chance, we too might nibble a forbidden turnip. He presents exhibits, a piece of chewed rope, clearly evidence of poor penmanship in the construction of the pen, and a wilted bouquet of wildflowers as character testimony from the neighboring field. He calls for witnesses, a shepherd who can barely keep a straight face, and a small child who testifies that the sheep looked sad about the whole thing. If nothing else, it's entertaining. As the speech ends, a hush falls. For a moment, the seriousness of it all nearly overcomes the absurdity. Nearly, the judge stifles a smile, the jury looks thoughtful, and someone in the back starts a slow, sarcastic clap. The sheep, still blissfully unaware of its legal peril, sneezes and knocks over a mug of water. Master Torben bows, case made, hoping to sway a crowd more interested in lunch than legal precedent. In medieval animal courts, a passionate defense doesn't always mean acquittal, but for a brief moment, justice feels noble, the crowd is entertained, and everyone remembers why these trials matter. Sometimes, everyone just needs a good story and a sheep to root for. The mood in the courtroom shifts as the prosecution stands up, back straight, eyes gleaming with the self-importance only a village prosecutor can muster. In medieval animal courts, the prosecutor's job is part legal expert, part storyteller, and part master of small-town theatrics. Today's prosecutor, Master Eberhard, is ready to deliver his magnum opus against a goose accused of deliberate mischief, theft of grain, and conspiracy to honk during sacred moments. He begins with a bow that suggests he's practiced in front of a mirror and launches directly into his opening salvo. Your Honor, respected jury, assembled citizens, and assorted animals, today we confront a menace so brazen, so relentless, that even the saints must cover their ears. I speak, of course, of the accused, this goose. He points, and the goose, unbothered, takes the opportunity to relieve itself on the floor. The crowd erupts in scandalized gasps, which Master Eberhard takes as a sign to press on. In my years of service, Eberhard intones, I have seen pigs accused of murder, cows of arson, and one memorable duck for sorcery. But never have I encountered such a feathered fiend as we face today. He dramatically produces a sack of stolen grain, carefully tied with string, which he claims was found in the defendant's quarters. The scribe writes this down, helpfully noting that the sack still smells of onions and regret. The prosecution's strategy is simple: pile up accusations and see what sticks. Eberhard details a week-long reign of terror. Witnesses have spotted the goose in places it had no business being: the mayor's kitchen, the church steps, even, suspiciously, the confessional. This goose is not content to live the simple life of pond and pasture, he proclaims, but instead seeks glory and snacks in equal measure. He calls his first witness, old Hans the miller, who insists the goose looked him straight in the eye before making off with a precious handful of barley. It wasn't just theft, Your Honor, Hans declares, it was premeditated. The crowd murmurs, a premeditating goose is news indeed. Next comes Sister Agnes, who testifies that her prayers were interrupted not once, not twice, but thrice, by unholy honking during Vespers. The Lord himself would struggle to maintain focus, she claims, with that racket outside the chapel. The goose, for its part, honks at the exact wrong moment, earning an accusatory glare from the judge and a sympathetic pat from the defense. The prosecution doesn't stop at concrete charges. They delight in lurid legend and rumor. Eberhard brings up the ancient story of the goose of calamity, an omen said to appear before bad harvests and worse marriages. Is it not suspicious, he asks, that this year's bread is half as fluffy and the mayor's wife twice as angry? Coincidence? Or a conspiracy of geese? As the accusations mount, the prosecution's performance grows increasingly theatrical. There are wild gestures, dramatic pauses, and at one point, a chart drawn on the back of a flour sack that shows a suspicious spike in missing pastries every Thursday. Days when, apparently, the defendant was seen near the bakery. Eberhard's voice crescendos. If we do not act now, what next? Will our children be safe from poultry pilferers? Will the church bells be drowned out by the cackling of the guilty? Today, we stand for law, for order, and for the sanctity of our sandwiches. By the time the prosecution rests, the crowd is breathless. Some nod along in fear, others stifle laughter behind their sleeves. The judge, struggling to maintain composure, asks if there is any more evidence, to which Eberhard replies with a final, ominous, "Not yet, Your Honor. But I am watching the goats." In the world of medieval animal trials, the prosecution's case is less about justice and more about showmanship, a public exorcism of small-town frustrations, performed at the expense of whichever animal is unlucky enough to stand accused. And so, the legend of the criminal goose grows ever larger, one accusation at a time. You shuffle your way into the courthouse, if it can really be called that. There's no marble, no columns, and no grand clock tower looming overhead. Instead, you find yourself standing in what is essentially the largest barn in town, half meeting hall, half livestock pen, and entirely drafty. Sunlight slants in through gaps in the thatch, illuminating clouds of dust, the occasional chicken feather, and a constant parade of small, unidentifiable insects making their own legal arguments in the rafters. The first thing you notice, before the judge, before the bailiff, even before the accused pig tied to a post, is the smell. The air is thick with it, a swirling blend of hay, old wood, candle wax, mud, goat, and an underlying hint of mildew that no amount of incense can quite mask. You wonder briefly if you should have brought a scented handkerchief. But judging by the state of everyone else's sleeves, you're not alone in your suffering. Medieval justice, you realize, is as much an assault on the nose as it is on the mind. The courtroom is a study in practical, if questionable, design. Rows of benches are crudely hammered together, some missing a leg and leaning precariously, others simply planks balanced on barrels. At the front, a large wooden table serves as the judge's bench, covered with sheafs of parchment, a chipped mug, and, unhelpfully, a half-eaten turnip. Beside it, a rusty candlestick provides as much light as a cloudy afternoon, flickering every time someone walks past. Every footstep echoes, thanks to the wooden floorboards that creak and groan in protest with every new arrival. Someone's dog wanders underfoot, sniffing for crumbs or misplaced evidence. You find a seat, if you can call it that, and try to make yourself comfortable. The bench beneath you wobbles alarmingly, and the person beside you, probably the local cobbler, by the smell of leather and singed hair, nods a polite hello before immediately returning to picking straw out of his shoes. In the back, a pair of sheep, likely waiting for their own day in court, peer through a crude wooden railing, chewing absent-mindedly and judging everyone in sight. At the heart of the room, the village scribe is already in position, parchment unfurled and quill in hand, ready to record every detail. He occasionally sneezes, sending a fine dusting of hay into the ink. Next to him, the bailiff paces back and forth, holding a staff and looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else. Perhaps chasing goats out of his vegetable patch, or taking a nap in the Sunday. The villagers crowd in, craning for a view, arguing about seating, and loudly discussing the case at hand. One man is still arguing about last month's infamous duck verdict, insisting the whole thing was rigged. Outside, you can hear the lowing of cattle, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, and the faint chanting of the priest, who insists on blessing the courthouse before every session, though even holy water struggles against centuries of spilled soup and muddy boots. Despite the rustic decor and less than ideal acoustics, the room crackles with anticipation. Trials here are as much social event as legal proceeding, a rare break in the monotony of medieval life. For many, it's the highlight of the week, or even the season. People dress up for the occasion, or at least wear their least muddy tunic. Gossip is exchanged as freely as bread crusts. News from neighboring villages travels faster inside these walls than it ever does by foot or cart. You settle in, resigned to the splinters and the smell, and wait for the proceedings to begin. In this space, justice may not always be fair, or quick, or especially sanitary, but it's always memorable. Welcome to the medieval courthouse, where the hay is fresh, the gossip is stale, and history is written in mud and manure. The court crier yells "Oyez," and proceedings begin. The pig stares, the rooster preens, and the entire audience waits for justice, preferably before lunchtime. There's a real chance the pig will try to eat the evidence. The scribe finishes arranging his parchment. The judge settles in with a satisfied grunt. And then comes the moment everyone's been waiting for, the formal opening of court. The bailiff clears his throat, puffs out his chest, and delivers the ancient call with the gusto of a man who has spent his whole life being ignored. Oh yes, oh yes. Court is now in session. The crowd's murmur drops to a low buzz. Someone drops a turnip. A sheep sneezes in the back. You look around, trying to imagine this is anything other than absurd. But the villagers are absolutely rapt. Oyez is the medieval equivalent of order in the court, though with more syllables and far fewer results. The defendant, today a scruffy rooster, stands in the makeshift dock, a wicker laundry basket that's been pressed into service for justice. His accusers stare him down with a mix of suspicion and hunger. The rooster blinks, cocks his head, and proceeds to preen, as if courtroom decorum is beneath him. First order of business. The charges are read aloud. The judge, voice echoing off the rafters, announces, "The rooster is accused of crowing at unholy hours, disturbing the peace, inciting a dog to bark, and laying waste to the dignity of the town's sleep." There's a ripple of laughter, immediately shushed by the priest, who looks especially sleep-deprived. A rooster crowing at sunrise is an occupational hazard of village life, but crowing at midnight, clearly witchcraft. The scribe scratches away at his parchment, trying to capture the spirit of the accusations without getting feather dander in the ink. The prosecution rises and, with all the solemnity he can muster, paints a portrait of a feathered delinquent, a bird who neither respects the church bell nor the sacred silence of slumber. The defense, a young notary who once lost a spelling contest to a goat, protests, "My client is simply following his nature. If the rooster crows at midnight, perhaps it is the sun that is to blame for being late." The judge nods, considering the argument with the air of a man who is also, frankly, quite tired. The rooster crows again, this time with a triumphant flourish, as if to underscore the point. Now comes the parade of witnesses. Old Greta, who hasn't slept a full night since 1349, swears the rooster crows at every hour divisible by 3. Young Peter says the bird's shrieks inspired his dog to bark, which inspired the neighbor's baby to wail, which inspired half the village to consider exile. The baker blames the rooster for burnt bread. The blacksmith blames the rooster for his wife's headaches. The list of complaints grows longer, more creative, and increasingly personal. Meanwhile, the rooster is unmoved. He grooms a wing, pecks at some invisible crumb, and looks generally unrepentant. The defense tries to shift blame to the village clock, a sundial that only tells time when the sun isn't behind a cloud. A rare event at best. "Is it not the sundial that has failed us all?" he pleads. The jury, comprised of people who still think the world is flat, looks uncertain. As the trial rolls on, decorum starts to slip. Someone in the audience bets on the outcome. A hen is discovered under the scribe's chair. The priest begins mumbling prayers for patience. The judge, perhaps swayed by the lack of sleep, suggests a break for lunch. The rooster attempts to fly out of the basket and is quickly caught by the bailiff, whose job description now includes bird wrangler. You sit back and take in the spectacle. It's far from the dignified proceedings of legend, but it's a perfect slice of medieval life. Chaotic, communal, occasionally feathered, and always unpredictable. Oyez, they say. But what they really mean is let the madness begin. The animal's day in court is never quiet, never short, and never, ever boring. And as you glance at the door, you wonder, if the rooster loses, who's next? The town cat? The mischievous goat? Or just maybe the bailiff himself? In a place like this, anything is possible. It's time for the courtroom's favorite event, the cross-examination. The bailiff calls for the next witness, and, in a move that could only make sense in a medieval village, it's the accused animal itself. Today's star, the infamous goat of Street Berta's Lane, known far and wide for its appetite, attitude, and, apparently, its shifty eyes. You watch as the goat is led to the front, rope around its neck, hooves clopping on the creaky floorboards. The judge tries to look stern, but you can tell he's still fighting a smile from the rooster trial earlier. The prosecutor approaches, parchment in hand, ready to interrogate. Never mind that the witness is currently chewing on the corner of the table. State your name for the record, the prosecutor intones, which earns him nothing but a slow blink and a louder crunch from the goat. Let the record show, the scribe announces, that the accused has declined to answer. The audience snickers. Somewhere in the back, a chicken clucks, as if to say, "See? This is why you never testify." Undeterred, the prosecutor presses on. "Is it true you ate Mistress Anki's washing from the line last Tuesday?" he asks, waving a suspiciously tattered kerchief. The goat eyes the kerchief, leans forward and snatches it away, chewing enthusiastically as the evidence vanishes before the jury's eyes. Let the record show, the scribe says, that the witness has consumed the evidence. The judge sighs, the jury laughs, and the goat, having now eaten part of the prosecution's case, stands chewing and staring as if to challenge anyone else to bring evidence forward. You marvel at the sheer absurdity. In the modern world, witnesses are told to speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Here, the challenge is simply to get through testimony without losing your laundry. Next, the defense takes their shot. Can anyone truly blame a goat for eating what goats were born to eat? The attorney pleads, hands raised in a rhetorical flourish. Do we not, as humans, also succumb to temptation? Who among us has not, at some point, eaten someone else's plum pudding from the larder? The crowd nods, many looking suddenly guilty. The goat snorts, as if agreeing with this line of reasoning. To add to the spectacle, the defense calls its own character witness, the town's stray dog, who promptly wanders in, circles 3 times, and falls asleep on the bailiff's boot. The dog, it seems, is at peace with the goat, the defense concludes. The judge, who has long since given up on protocol, notes, a more honest endorsement than most humans could provide. Then comes a medieval twist. Sometimes, the animal answers through behavior. The scribe documents every twitch, sneeze, and headbutt, interpreting the goat's actions as implied admissions or denials. Did the goat stamp its hoof when accused? Guilt. Did it stare unblinkingly at the baker? Possible conspiracy. Did it fall asleep halfway through proceedings? Contempt of court, or just a very comfortable goat? You realize the process is as much about pageantry as justice. The cross-examination isn't really meant to uncover facts. It's theatre, catharsis, and a community joke, all rolled into one. Children giggle as the goat nibbles on a wig. Old folks reminisce about the time the mayor's donkey refused to testify. The scribe scribbles diligently, adding flourishes and embellishments. This trial, after all, will be recounted for years to come. By the end, the judge leans forward, eyes twinkling, and thanks the witness for its candor, such as it was. The goat bows, or more likely, tries to scratch an itch, and is led back to its corner. Everyone applauds, the prosecutor salvages his dignity, and the trial barrels onward, slightly messier, considerably funnier, and with far less evidence than when it began. And you? You can't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, the animals are winning. As the trial creaks forward and the crowd begins to murmur, a hush falls across the barn court. The next authority to enter isn't a judge or lawyer, but the village priest. In medieval justice, the clergy hold enormous sway. Not only do they get the best seats and the freshest bread, but their words can make the difference between a guilty verdict and an ecclesiastical pardon, sometimes involving a generous helping of holy water and more Latin than anyone really understands. Today's spiritual heavyweight is Father Anselm, a man with eyebrows thicker than most hedges and a habit of starting every statement with a sigh. He enters, swinging a censer and scattering a cloud of incense that mixes alarmingly with the barnyard aromas. Children clutch their noses. Even the defendant, a goose accused of malicious trespass and ungodly honking, seems temporarily subdued. The judge stands, half out of respect, half to avoid inhaling another lungful of smoke. Father Anselm, as an expert in moral matters and livestock-related sin, what say you in the matter of this goose? The priest glances at the honking perpetrator, who responds with a noise best described as halfway between a trumpet and a yawn. Father Anselm clears his throat and launches into a sermon equal parts theological treatise and barnyard cautionary tale. Throughout history, he intones, the beasts of the earth have served both as faithful servants and, occasionally, as instruments of the devil's mischief. He pauses for effect, scanning the crowd. When a goose strays from the path of righteousness, be it through theft, blasphemy, or excessive noise, it is our duty to discern whether mere hunger is to blame or something darker lurks within. This, in medieval times, is not just rhetorical flourish. Many genuinely believe that animals can be possessed, bewitched, or otherwise spiritually compromised. If a sow tramples a child, a rooster crows at the wrong hour, or a dog howls at a funeral, whispers of sorcery or satanic influence quickly follow. The priest's presence at trial is less about legal advice and more about spiritual diagnostics, sometimes involving full-blown exorcism. Father Anselm examines the goose with all the gravitas of a bishop inspecting a suspicious relic. He recites a prayer, sprinkles holy water, accidentally hitting the scribe, who flinches and drops his quill, and chants a few verses in Latin. The crowd watches, transfixed. The goose, perhaps sensing the gravity of the moment or simply not fond of water, attempts to waddle away, only to be caught by the bailiff. Next, the priest delivers his diagnosis. I find no clear sign of diabolical possession, though the honking does suggest a restless spirit. The crowd nods, grateful for such expert opinion. Still, he recommends a short period of penance, perhaps fewer scraps from the tavern, and a stern warning to attend to church bells rather than compete with them. Sometimes, the priest's role grows even more dramatic. For more serious cases, the clergy might declare the animal excommunicated, formally expelled from the spiritual community, as if a goose or pig might someday repent and seek forgiveness. In rare, more theatrical trials, full exorcisms are conducted, with bell, book, and candle, and the animal's fate hangs on whether it can behave itself through an hour of prayer. All of this, of course, makes perfect sense if you live in a world where storms are blamed on witches and failed crops on sinful cattle. The villagers listen with rapt attention. For them, spiritual order is as important as legal order, and the line between the two is about as clear as the water in the village well. With the priest's assessment delivered, the case moves on. The goose seems only slightly less possessed. The crowd is a little more entertained, and the scribe's notes now read, "Goose, cleansed, but not entirely. As the clergy step aside, you're left to marvel. In a world full of uncertainty, the priest's blessing is a comfort, even if it doesn't make the honking any less loud. When it comes to sentencing, medieval justice has a certain flair, especially for animal defendants. You might imagine a stern warning, a stern look, or maybe a heartfelt chat about proper barnyard etiquette. Not so. In these courts, the penalties are as dramatic as the accusations, sometimes even more so. It starts with the judge, now perched on his creaky bench like a vulture considering dinner. The jury leans in, eager to see what spectacle awaits. The crowd buzzes, half morbid, half gleeful, and the animal in question, whether pig, goose, or goat, usually seems more interested in the possibility of a dropped crust of bread than in its looming fate. The most infamous penalty, and the one that crops up in the most lurid retellings, is execution by hanging. Yes, hanging. If you think this is a punchline, so did many people, until they saw it with their own eyes. The executioner, a man with a strong back and a questionable sense of dignity, prepares the noose. The pig, for example, is solemnly led to the gallows, surrounded by a crowd that ranges from horrified to delighted. "This'll teach the others," someone always says, as if word of the event will spread through the livestock grapevine. In some cases, the pig is dressed in a waistcoat or has a sign reading "murderer" hung around its neck, just in case anyone missed the point. If the offense is less severe, or the defendant is particularly slippery, drowning may be the sentence. This is especially true for creatures accused of witchcraft, because, as any medieval expert will tell you, evil floats. Or was it sinks? No one seems entirely sure, but the end result is the same. The animal is tossed into the nearest pond, river, or, if the budget is tight, a particularly deep mud puddle. If it sinks, it's innocent but, unfortunately, also drowned. If it floats, it's guilty and probably gets retried for sorcery. Not all punishments end with a dramatic exit. Sometimes, the animal is simply banished. This sounds gentle until you realize banishment means trudging the pig, goat, or even a dog past the village boundary and sending it off with a warning never to return, enforced by whoever can be trusted not to sneak the beast back home for sentimental reasons. Banishment, for smaller creatures, is even more abstract. Rats or locusts are formally expelled from the community by legal decree, the equivalent of reading them a sternly worded breakup letter and then praying they take the hint. Of course, these public punishments are more than just judicial decisions. They're events. The whole village turns out to watch, to gossip, to judge the judge and heckle the executioner. Vendors sell pastries, children run underfoot, and the scribe dutifully records every twist of fate in case some future historian wants to know exactly what time the pig's last meal was served. These executions and banishments become cautionary tales for both peasants and livestock. Don't cross the law, don't eat the turnips, and definitely don't attack the mayor's cousin. Some judges, either out of mercy, boredom, or the intervention of the priest, go for a lighter sentence. A symbolic penance, maybe a period of fasting which the animal ignores, or a ritual cleansing. But those stories are less likely to be retold by the fireside. It's the hanged pig, the drowned rooster, and the banished goat that keep the legend of animal trials alive for generations. As the crowd disperses, you find yourself pondering the logic behind it all. It's harsh, it's ridiculous, but in its own strange way, it's an attempt to restore order and offer closure, at least until the next goat gets hungry. In medieval courts, the penalties are unforgettable, even if the animals themselves would probably prefer a quiet life and an unmolested cabbage patch. You'd think, after the dramatic sentencing, whether hanging, drowning, or a particularly stern banishment, that would be the end of the story. But medieval courts, in their relentless pursuit of fairness, or, let's be honest, the chance for more spectacle, sometimes entertained the idea of an appeal. That's right. Even if your client is a pig with mud on its snout and a list of convictions longer than its tail, you can, in theory, ask for a retrial. It usually starts with the owner, red-faced and desperate, marching up to the judge, hat in hand, with a speech about injustice and good character. Sometimes it's a neighbor who intervenes, perhaps motivated by pity, friendship, or the sneaking suspicion they'll be next if the courts keep up this pace. There are tales of entire villages banding together, signing petitions with more X's than actual names, begging for mercy for Bessie the cow or Bartholomew the donkey. Appeals are rarely granted, but that hardly stops anyone from trying. The process is about as organized as you'd expect. Step 1. Approach the bench and present your case. Your Honor, you might begin. My pig has been misunderstood. She is not, as the prosecution claimed, a menace to society, but rather a gentle soul who once saved a child from a runaway turnip cart. Step 2. Gather witnesses who may or may not have actually seen the alleged event but are eager to speak on behalf of any animal that keeps their garden free of weeds. Step 3 is where things get creative. If the accused animal is especially valuable, say, a prize-milking cow or a goose with a reputation for chasing off foxes, the stakes are higher. The defense might offer to pay a fine in exchange for clemency, donate the animal to the church, or promise never to let it out unsupervised again. In a few rare cases, the defense will claim legal irregularity. The rooster was tried before sunrise, the scribe's ink was low, or the jury was biased because one of them still holds a grudge from the last cabbage festival. When the appeal is heard, the atmosphere is thick with tension and hope, as if the fate of the entire village hangs on whether or not a sheep gets a second chance. The judge listens, sometimes with genuine interest, more often with the patience of someone who has heard every excuse under the Sunday. The scribe, delighted by the novelty, records everything in detail, ensuring that generations to come will know that on the third day of Michaelmas, the Honourable Court heard the case of Pig v. People again. There are, of course, moments of high drama. The accused animal, blissfully unaware of the legal turmoil, might perform an act of contrition, lying down quietly, refusing to eat the evidence, or, in one memorable case, producing a perfectly timed and very innocent bleat. The crowd, ever eager for theatre, takes sides. Some cheer for justice, others for mercy, and a few just hope for another pie to be passed around during deliberations. Sometimes, the appeal works. A sentence is commuted to community service, read, pulling a plough, or the animal is set free, with stern warnings and the threat of exile if it so much as glances at another cabbage. Other times, the appeal fails and the original sentence stands. But regardless of the outcome, the act of appealing becomes its own legend. Stories spread, embellished with every retelling. The heroic pig who almost beat the rap. The clever donkey whose owner out, argued the prosecutor. The cow who received a blessing from the priest and lived happily ever after, until the next potato shortage. In the end, animal appeals aren't really about law or justice. They're about hope, community, and the eternal human desire for a little more drama. Because in a medieval village, sometimes the greatest entertainment is seeing if a pig can outwit the system one last time. The year is 1474, and you find yourself in Basel, Switzerland, a city famous for its bustling markets, high stone walls, and, on this particular day, a legal proceeding so absurd it could only happen in the Middle Ages. Word has spread through the narrow cobbled streets that the city court is convening not for a thief, a murderer, or even an unruly goat, but for a rooster. The charge, laying an egg. You join the swelling crowd in the square, everyone craning for a glimpse of the accused. Perched in a wooden cage sits the rooster, feathers fluffed in indignation, occasionally clucking and looking entirely unrepentant. Children are hoisted onto shoulders. Housewives and apprentices gossip in low voices. Even the stern-faced bishop can't help but glance sideways at the bird, as if daring it to lay another egg in public. At first, you think this must be a joke. But then the judge arrives, robed and solemn, followed by the city clerk, a phalanx of notaries, and a priest clutching both Bible and bell. The charges are read with all the gravity due a capital case. This rooster, found in the stable of Herr Vogel, stands accused of producing an egg. Not an ordinary egg, but a small, white, perfectly formed one. The rooster crows as if to protest the characterization. In medieval Europe, this is no laughing matter. Everyone knows that roosters do not lay eggs. If one does, something unnatural is at play. Superstition swirls. It's said such eggs are tools of the devil, used by witches to hatch monsters or summon evil spirits. Some whisper about cockatrices, legendary creatures hatched from rooster eggs, capable of turning men to stone with a glance. If the crowd wasn't already worked up, the mention of witchcraft and monsters guarantees a fever pitch. The prosecution wastes no time, parading out a series of experts. The first is the town's oldest midwife, who swears on her honor she has never seen such a thing. Next comes the apothecary, who sniffs the egg, taps it with a spoon, and declares it absolutely suspicious. The priest launches into a fiery warning about the dangers of meddling with God's natural order, suggesting that if they ignore this sign, the city could fall to famine, plague, or worse, excessive honking. The defense, in a rare stroke of medieval mercy, tries to argue that perhaps the rooster is simply misunderstood. Is it so strange, he pleads, for the world to throw us a mystery? Must we always assume evil when we do not understand? The judge listens, frowns, and consults a heavy tome. Equal parts, Bible, law code, and herbal remedies. The rooster's fate hangs in the balance. Some call for banishment, others for exorcism. A few, perhaps with a softer spot for poultry, suggest a life sentence on a farm far, far away. But the tide turns when the clerk reads aloud an old decree. Any beast that manifests the unnatural shall be punished to prevent calamity. The sentence is passed. The rooster is condemned to death. The egg, wrapped in cloth, is to be burned at the crossroads so that no harm may come of its evil potential. The crowd watches as justice, if that's what you call it, unfolds. The priest blesses the sight, the notaries record every step, and the rooster is dispatched with far more ceremony than most peasants could ever hope for. In the end, the legend of the Basel rooster becomes part of local law. Children repeat the story for years. Roosters everywhere keep a wary eye on their eggs. And townsfolk, perhaps a little wiser or just more nervous, watch for signs of the uncanny in the barnyard. And you? You walk home from the trial a little more suspicious of breakfast, and a lot more certain that in medieval times, sometimes the most dangerous thing you could be was simply misunderstood. It's a sticky, sweltering afternoon, and the village is restless. There's not a pig or goat in the defendant's chair today. No. The entire court is bracing for an enemy so numerous, so relentless, that even the bravest farmer feels a shiver. Locusts. Yes, those buzzing, biting, crop-devouring clouds. The courtroom, if you can call it that, is full to bursting. The villagers are grim. The priest is praying. The bailiff keeps swatting at anything with wings. And the judge, fanning himself with a legal summons, prepares to try the most notorious criminals of all. Bugs. In medieval Europe, when disaster struck, people didn't blame bad weather or poor planning. They blamed someone. And when a locust swarm descended, stripping fields bare and leaving famine in its wake, it wasn't enough to shake fists at the sky. The solution? A lawsuit. Not just against one locust, against all of them. Class action, barnyard style. You watch as the trial begins with surprising ceremony. The court clerk solemnly reads the indictment, charging the community of locusts with malicious trespass, wanton destruction of property, and conspiracy to starve the righteous. The prosecution nods vigorously, while the defense, a rather nervous-looking village friar, pressed into service as the locusts' advocate, tries to look serious and not entirely overwhelmed. "Your Honor," the prosecutor bellows, "for weeks these pests have ravaged our crops, ruined our feasts, and left our children hungry. They show no remorse. They heed no warning. If we do not act, they will destroy us all." He gestures at the nearest open window, through which several bugs promptly buzz, adding dramatic flair to his case. The defense rises, face flushed, and does his best to argue on behalf of the bugs. "Perhaps, Your Honor, these locusts are not wicked by nature. Perhaps they are simply hungry. Would we not, if faced with want, do the same? Is there no mercy in the law for the unfortunate?" He glances nervously at a cloud of flies gathering near the jury box, as if hoping for moral support. Testimony is offered by the entire town. Farmers describe wheat fields stripped overnight, gardens left bare, and barley flattened to mush. The miller's wife insists she saw a particularly large grasshopper organizing the smaller ones into ranks. The local healer swears that her herbs have been chewed to stubs, making the village more likely to catch colds than ever. The crowd grows restless, itching at invisible bites. As the accusations fly, the judge listens intently, his brow furrowed in judicial concentration, or possibly just irritation at the constant buzzing. The scribe, valiant in the face of adversity, tries to record each witness statement while batting away flies from his inkpot. In a moment of inspiration, the prosecution calls the priest, who assures the court that the Book of Exodus is clear. Sometimes, locusts are a punishment, sometimes a test, and sometimes just really, really bad luck. Then, the verdict. The judge stands, dusts off his robe, and proclaims, "Having heard the evidence and seen the devastation, this court finds the locusts guilty, as charged." A gasp goes up. The penalty is as creative as the crime. The priest is to pronounce a formal excommunication. Bells are rung. Psalms are sung. Holy water is sprinkled across the fields, and the official court decree is nailed to a tree, commanding the locusts to leave by sunset or face divine consequences. Of course, the bugs don't show up for sentencing. No locusts ever appear in court, no matter how stern the summons. But the ritual has its purpose. The villagers, having done everything in their power, both practical and theatrical, feel a little more in control. For a day or two, spirits are lifted, even if the crops are still gone. You leave the courthouse, bemused but oddly satisfied. In a world where bugs are the enemy, sometimes a lawsuit is less about the bugs and more about reminding yourself you haven't surrendered. At least not without a fight and a really good story for the grandkids. Long after the villagers have drifted home and the last rooster has crowed his innocence to an unsympathetic moon, one person remains behind in the courthouse: the scribe. In a world where most people leave nothing behind but muddy footprints, it's the scribe who records the strange, the mundane, and the downright unbelievable for future generations. Tonight, hunched over a scarred oak desk, lit by a single flickering candle, he prepares to write the sentence that will become legend. Let it be known that on this day, the accused pig was found guilty of cabbage theft and sentenced to banishment, with the possibility of return pending good behavior and the next harvest. Medieval law is nothing if not obsessed with documentation. Every trial, no matter how absurd, is carefully transcribed in flowing script across brittle parchment. The scribe's job is a blend of historian, journalist, and reluctant creative writer. He must capture not just the facts, who did what, to whom, And with how many witnesses, but the whole circus, the bailiff's fumble, the judge's cough, the goat's unexpected detour through the gallery. You peer over the scribe's shoulder as he dips his quill into a battered inkwell, pausing every so often to blow on the wet ink or to scratch a stubborn flea. The air smells of wax, wool, and the faint tang of iron from the ink. In the margins of the document, he occasionally doodles a sketch of the pig in question, a caricature of the priest, or, if he's feeling especially bold, a cartoon of the judge falling off his bench. The language of the court is always formal, regardless of the case. The aforementioned pig, having been summoned before this honourable bench, and having failed to deny the charge of wilful rooting in the parson's vegetable plot, is hereby declared an enemy of order and a threat to the peace of the realm. In reality, it's mostly a pig who got hungry, but in ink and parchment, it becomes history. Even if tomorrow everyone forgets the details, the document will survive. Maybe tucked in a church chest, maybe lining the inside of someone's boot, maybe rediscovered by a future generation convinced it's evidence of widespread medieval pig conspiracies. Sentencing itself is a solemn affair on paper, even when the actual event is anything but. The verdict is spelled out with painstaking detail, including the method of punishment, hanging by the neck until dead or until otherwise decided by the crowd's mood. The reason for the sentence: flagrant disregard for the sanctity of kitchen gardens. And, in some cases, instructions for carrying out the sentence. Let it be witnessed by at least 3 sober villagers and 1 member of the clergy, provided the latter is not napping. Sometimes, the legal records become a place for commentary. Let it also be said, the scribe might add, that the goose attempted to bribe the court with a golden feather, but this was found to be wax and promptly eaten by the accused. These unofficial notes, snuck into the margins, are the medieval version of online comments, irreverent, gossipy, and far more interesting than the verdict itself. Seals are melted, ribbons are tied, and the scribe finally leans back, stretching his aching fingers. Somewhere in a storeroom, these parchments accumulate, rows and rows of pig trials, chicken inquisitions, and the occasional class action against weevils. Generations later, historians will stumble across these records and wonder if everyone was just slightly mad, or if the animals really did have it out for medieval civilization. As you watch the last lines dry in the candlelight, you realize that history is made not by the mighty, but by whoever has the patience to write it down, especially if it involves a duck, a cabbage, and a court with a sense of humor. As the trial draws to its dramatic conclusion, the villagers hold their breath. The sentence is read: death by hanging, not for a criminal mastermind or a disgraced noble, but for a pig with an unfortunate taste for mischief, and perhaps a few unattended turnips. Now, attention turns to a man both feared and necessary in medieval society: the executioner. The executioner arrives in the square as quietly as a man with a bag of ropes and a grim expression can manage. He's not the shadowy figure from bedtime stories. He's your neighbor's cousin, the one with strong arms, a thick neck, and the rare gift of not fainting at the sight of blood. His job is neither glamorous nor popular. Some villagers avoid his gaze, making the sign of the cross. Others whisper that his beard is full of curses. He shrugs it off. The truth is, he'd rather be shoeing horses than prepping for public animal justice. Preparations begin with methodical, almost ritualistic precision. The gallows, a creaky wooden frame on the edge of the village green, is checked for splinters. The rope, coiled and reused more times than anyone likes to admit, is tested for strength. Nobody wants a repeat of last year's botched goose incident. Children are hushed and told to stand back. The priest arrives, muttering prayers and giving the pig a final blessing, just in case divine intervention is an option. The pig, who seems oblivious to its fate, snuffles around the grass, nose twitching with curiosity. Someone ties a small placard around its neck. Guilty. This is less for the pig's benefit than for the crowd, who love a touch of theatre with their justice. The executioner, voice low and businesslike, reassures the animal as best he can. He's done this before, not just for pigs, but for the occasional dog, goat, and, memorably, a rooster with an attitude problem. There's an odd solemnity to the proceedings. The villagers, normally so lively, grow quiet. This isn't just punishment. It's a warning, a shared ritual. Some watch with grim fascination. Others, especially children, peek between their fingers, torn between horror and excitement. The scribe records every moment. On this day, with the sun just above the chapel roof, the sentence was carried out according to law and custom. The pig offered no resistance, save for a last hopeful glance at a nearby apple. For the executioner, this is a strange line of work. On one hand, he's part of the justice system, a necessary tool for enforcing the law. On the other, he's an outsider, sometimes shunned at festivals and never quite invited to weddings. But animal executions are a category all their own. He often wonders if the animals understand any of it, or if they simply resent missing lunch. There's no glory in hanging a pig. Only the uneasy laughter of a village trying to make sense of the world's chaos. After the deed is done, the body is disposed of with as much dignity as the circumstances allow, buried outside the village boundary. Sometimes burned, sometimes carted away by a farmer with low standards for pork. The crowd lingers, dissecting every detail, speculating about omens and possible curses. Someone claims the pig's last look was one of forgiveness. Someone else claims it winked. The priest declares the village safe for another year, while the executioner quietly packs away his tools and slips into the shadows. The legend of the hanged pig will outlast everyone involved. Children will whisper about it under blankets. Adults will retell the story when the ale runs low. And somewhere, the executioner will sharpen his blade, fix a broken cartwheel, and wait for the next sentence, knowing, perhaps better than anyone, that justice is sometimes just another word for doing what must be done, even when it makes no sense at all. As the last echoes of the sentence fade and the crowd begins to drift away, the aftermath of an animal trial lingers in the air. For the condemned beast, it's over in a flash. A confused pig, goose, or goat finds itself on the wrong side of history. But for the animal's owner, and sometimes for the entire family, the real drama is only just beginning. In a medieval village, social standing is a fragile thing, and nothing ruins your reputation quite like having your livestock hauled before a judge. At first, there's a hush. People pretend not to stare as you gather your things, or, worse, the remains of your recently convicted goat. But soon the whispers start. That's Ulrich, you know. The one whose pig went bad. Children point as you walk past, and adults lower their voices, but not enough to stop you hearing. No one wants to share a stew pot with the family of the turnip thief. The village gossip mill runs on humiliation, and nothing fuels it better than a public trial. Your neighbors become experts in animal psychology overnight. You can always tell, one will say, when a pig is up to no good. You see it in the eyes. Another chimes in, well, it's not surprising. Ulrich's mother's cousin's goat once ate Father Anselm's slippers. Family histories are rewritten, with every misdeed exaggerated and retold until you're convinced your lineage has been cursed by unruly livestock for generations. This infamy seeps into everyday life. The blacksmith raises his prices when you need a new horseshoe. The baker shortens your loaf. Someone moves your laundry from the communal line, just in case your criminal tendencies are catching. Worst of all, the priest starts giving sermons about the dangers of lax animal discipline, always staring directly at your pew. It's enough to make you consider moving to a village where no one has heard of you or your disgraced animals. And don't think it's only people who notice. Other animals, sensing the shift in human attitudes, start treating your barnyard outcasts like second-class citizens. The neighbor's chickens won't share the dust bath. The cows ignore your goat at the watering trough. Even the dogs give your pig a wide berth, as if barnyard notoriety is contagious. In a community where everyone, two-legged or four, knows their place, infamy is a heavy yoke to bear. Sometimes, the social fallout affects more than your reputation. It impacts your livelihood. If you're a tenant farmer, the Lord might think twice about renewing your lease. If you sell eggs or milk at the market, customers dwindle, muttering about tainted goods. Prospective in-laws withdraw proposals. After all, who would marry into a family of notorious animal offenders? Even your children's chances of being chosen for chores or privileges shrink. Who wants the daughter of a sheep thief tending their orchard? Of course, some families try to reclaim their honor. They double down on good behavior, donate extra to the church, or volunteer for every muddy, thankless village task. A few invent stories to explain away the whole affair. Yes, the pig was framed. Jealous neighbors. It happens. Sometimes it works. More often, it becomes part of the legend, another odd tale to add to the stack. But as with all things medieval, time, and a few new scandals, usually does the trick. Another animal will eventually make the headlines. A goose that tripped the priest, a cow that wandered into the market and ate the mayor's hat. And the spotlight will move on. Your shame fades, your barnyard reintegrates, and life shuffles forward. Until then, you walk with your head high. Or as high as it can be with everyone snickering behind your back. In a world where animals stand trial and infamy sticks like mud, you learn to weather the gossip, outlast the stares, and hope your next pig is better at avoiding both cabbage patches and criminal charges. Just when you think village justice can't get any stranger, word spreads like wildfire. The king himself has taken notice of your case. For most, the idea of royal attention is both thrilling and terrifying. After all, a monarch's decree can change the course of your life, sometimes in your favor, more often in a way that makes you wish you'd stuck to cabbages. It starts with a rumor. The village bailiff arrives breathless from the city, waving a rolled-up scroll with more ribbons than sense. He announces with great ceremony that the case of your pig, or goose, or especially scandalous rooster, has reached the ears of the king. Immediately, the village divides. Some imagine this means a pardon. Others expect heads or tails to roll. Either way, it's the hottest news since last year's cow stampede. The royal decree itself is a thing of beauty and bureaucracy. Written in elaborate calligraphy and dripping with red wax seals, it might begin with a flourish. Let it be known to all in the kingdom, from the greatest castle to the humblest pigsty. There follows a summary of your animal's offences, sometimes rendered with more literary flair than strictly necessary, whereas it is alleged that a pig, hereinafter named as defendant, hath transgressed the laws of man and God by rooting in the bishop's turnip patch and laying waste to the dignity of the parish. If your animal's misadventure has reached the king, rest assured the whole thing will be exaggerated for dramatic effect. Depending on the monarch's mood, the royal decree can go in any number of directions. Occasionally, the king is amused. He finds the idea of a pig on trial a welcome diversion from war, plague, and his daily quota of beheading paperwork. Let the pig be pardoned, he might declare. For who among us has not been tempted by a fine turnip? Suddenly, your family is local royalty, at least for the next week, and the condemned animal is paraded through town in a mock victory lap. Children throw flower petals. The baker donates a celebratory loaf. The pig, of course, eats it. Other times, the king is less charitable. Perhaps the case is seen as a sign of declining morals or rural foolishness. The decree is swift and unsparing. The animal is to be executed, the owner fined, and the village reminded to keep its pigs on a tighter leash. In rare moments of royal exasperation, the king might send an official investigator, a man in shiny boots and a very large hat, to supervise. His job is less about justice and more about making sure no one is mocking the crown. The villagers grumble, the scribe is forced to make new copies of everything, and the accused animal, entirely unaware, goes about its business, possibly causing new trouble just to spite the king. Sometimes, the decree is baffling. Medieval kings are not known for consistency. Let the pig be dressed in a cloak and paraded before the parish to learn humility, one monarch might write. Another could order, henceforth, all future roosters are forbidden from laying eggs. The villagers dutifully comply, if only for the entertainment value. No matter the outcome, a royal decree is an event. It's read aloud in the square, witnessed by every man, woman, child, and bored goat. The town gossips for weeks. Copies are hung in the church, the tavern, and, for good measure, the bakery. Some are kept as family treasures. Others end up as fire starters or creative wrapping for particularly important wheels of cheese. In the end, royal intervention changes little about the realities of medieval justice. But it makes for a fantastic story, and in a world where pigs stand trial and kings take notice, you never know when your next cabbage crime might go national. It might surprise you, as you watch yet another goat shuffled into the defendant's box, that beneath all the drama, accusations, and truly questionable sentencing, there lurks a strange sort of medieval logic about animal rights. Not animal rights as you know them today. Nobody's building a sanctuary or drafting a bill of pig liberties, but a ragtag, often contradictory sense of compassion and cruelty rolled into one scratchy, hay-scented package. To begin with, animals in medieval society are everywhere. They share your home, your street, and occasionally your bed, whether you want them there or not. Cows are central heating. Chickens are alarm clocks. Dogs are security systems with fleas. This daily closeness means people know their animals well, sometimes better than their own neighbors. And while the law views animals as property, there's an undercurrent of respect, at least for the productive ones. Yet, as the animal trials make clear, medieval justice can swing wildly between mercy and mayhem. Sometimes, when the crowd gathers and the judge frowns over his parchment, it looks like compassion might actually win. Let the pig be spared, for she gives good milk, a villager pleads. Or, the goat meant no harm. She just has a wandering heart. A particularly useful ox, beloved for years, might be let off with a warning for trampling a fence, while a useless, ill-tempered rooster is doomed for disturbing the bishop's nap. On the other hand, medieval punishment is nothing if not dramatic. If an animal is unlucky enough to cause a real scandal, especially injury to a person, or sacrilege in a holy place, the response is severe. There are stories of pigs hanged, cows stoned, and horses exiled to distant fields, all in the name of setting an example. The spectacle of punishment is supposed to restore cosmic order and teach the community a lesson, even if the only thing the animals learn is that humans are unpredictable at best. But even the harshest sentences are often softened by loopholes and logic, so circular it would make a philosopher dizzy. Sometimes, mercy is practical. It's lambing season, we can't spare the ewe. Or, if you execute every rat, who will the cats chase? Judges are not above accepting bribes, usually in the form of eggs, cheese, or the promise of future favors. Priests might offer a special blessing to cleanse the accused, so everyone can save face and still have bacon for breakfast. For the truly sentimental, appeals to animal character are common. Old Berta may have eaten a few turnips, the defense argues, but she once pulled 3 children out of a ditch and has never missed Sunday Mass. Sometimes this is enough to tip the scales, especially if the animal in question is more popular than its owner. Of course, not every animal gets such leniency. Stray dogs, wild cats, and wandering swine without an advocate are quickly condemned, often for little more than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Outsiders rarely find mercy in a community always on the lookout for a scapegoat, sometimes quite literally. Even so, the fact that there's a trial at all, rather than summary slaughter, shows a peculiar brand of medieval justice. 1 part superstition, 1 part performance, and a dash of real affection. It's a world where you might see a priest blessing a pig, a child weeping for a doomed chicken, or a judge pausing before sentencing to pet the defendant on the head. And when it's all over, life goes on. The animals return to their routines, the villagers to theirs. The court records fill with tales of both cruelty and compassion. Each new case a reminder that, even in a time of hanged pigs and exiled goats, people could still surprise you with kindness, with forgiveness, and with the eternal hope that next year's animals will mind their manners, at least until the next harvest. If you spend enough time in a medieval village, you quickly learn that nothing happens by accident. Every misfortune, every lost cabbage, every thunderstorm or stubbed toe needs an explanation, and preferably one that doesn't implicate the local lord. Enter the ancient tradition of blaming the animals. In a world fueled by superstition and short on scientific understanding, it's only logical, at least by medieval standards, that the family pig or your neighbor's rooster becomes the scapegoat for all manner of calamity. Picture this. It's harvest season, and the barley crop fails. Was it drought, disease, poor planning? Hardly. The answer, according to the town's self-appointed experts, is obvious. The village goats are in league with evil spirits. The evidence? One was seen standing on its hind legs at sunrise, which is either yoga or witchcraft, and in either case, not to be trusted. Within a day, there's a summons nailed to the barn door, and the goat finds itself facing the full weight of medieval jurisprudence. Superstition is the glue that holds this world together, and often the hammer that smashes it apart. Medieval villagers believe in omens and portents with the same fervor you might reserve for breaking news alerts. If a cow refuses to cross a stream, there's a ghost in the water. If chickens lay misshapen eggs, the baker's wife has been consorting with fairies. Did a cat cross your path on your way to market and you lost a penny? Blame the cat, and don't be surprised if it winds up answering for your financial woes in court. These beliefs aren't just quaint folklore, they're survival tools. In a time when disease, famine, and disaster seem to strike at random, blaming an animal gives people a sense of control, a target for their fear and frustration. If you can punish the guilty beast, perhaps you can ward off whatever bad luck lurks around the next corner. And if the Lord's favorite horse gets colic, you'd better believe it was that jealous neighbor's goat and not, say, the moldy hay you fed it last week. Some scapegoats get their roles through pure bad timing. A sheep who wanders into the church on the morning the bell rope snaps will be blamed for the broken bell. A piglet born with 2 spots on its head is accused of markings of the devil. There are stories of entire swarms of bees brought before the priest to be chastised for stinging without cause and denied honey privileges until further notice. These moments are both tragic and absurd, a window into a world desperate to explain itself. And yet, there's a certain sly logic to it all. If you're clever, you can steer suspicion away from your own animals and onto a rival's. Gossip is weaponized. Hints and rumors fly. "Did you see Marta's rooster at the crossroads last night?" whispers one neighbor. They say it crows only when someone's about to fall ill. Soon enough, the unfortunate rooster is in the dock, and Marta's social calendar is wide open for the foreseeable future. Of course, every so often the village gets it spectacularly wrong. The animal is punished, the crops still fail, and suddenly the baker's wife is in trouble for misdirected accusations. The cycle starts anew, with everyone a little more wary and a little more convinced that next time they'll get it right. But despite the cruelty and the injustice, these rituals also knit the community together. Everyone gets a part to play: accuser, defender, gossip, judge, and, unfortunately for some, defendant. When misfortune strikes, the village responds, not always wisely, but always together. And so, superstition gives shape to chaos, and animals, willing or not, become the scapegoats that keep the wheel of medieval life turning. Next time your soup burns or your socks go missing, just remember, once upon a time, someone would have put the family cat on trial and felt a little safer because of it. It's trial day in the village, and the excitement in the air is unmistakable. Forget the travelling juggler or the promise of a new thatched roof. There's nothing quite like the buzz that surrounds an animal on trial. The entire community shows up, eager to witness every twist and turn of barnyard justice. Old and young, farmer and merchant, gossip and grumbler, everyone is here. Even the animals seem to sense the occasion, their noses twitching at the prospect of spectacle or, possibly, spilled snacks. You take your place in the crowd, wedged between a blacksmith's apprentice and a baker's daughter, both arguing about which animal will be found guilty next. Children weave between legs, trying to get a closer look at the accused. A particularly bewildered goat today, looking out at the sea of faces with the calm of someone who has not yet realized it's the main attraction. Someone's already started taking bets. Will the goat be acquitted? Or will it suffer the fate of last month's thieving pig? Why this mass fascination? For one, animal trials offer a rare break in the grinding routine of medieval life. Most days are a blur of chores, weather complaints, and the endless hunt for something edible. A court day, by contrast, is pure theatre. There's anticipation, drama, and a guarantee that at least someone will be angrier than you by sunset. It's reality television centuries before anyone had a television, only with more hay and the ever-present possibility of someone being kicked. Vendors set up makeshift stalls on the green, hawking everything from mead to turnip pies. Children pester their parents for an extra treat, just this once, for the trial. Even the priest loosens up, greeting his flock with the air of a man who knows he'll have plenty of new confessions to process by morning. The trial becomes a village holiday, complete with laughter, arguments, and the chance to settle old scores through pointed comments shouted from the crowd. Of course, the spectacle isn't just about entertainment, it's about identity and community, too. Medieval villages are tight-knit worlds where everyone's business is everyone's business. When an animal stands accused, it's a story about all of them, their fears, their hopes, and, more often than not, their grievances. People come to support the accused, or to demand justice for their trampled carrots. Friendships are tested, grudges remembered, alliances forged and broken, all under the watchful eyes of the judge and the goat. As the trial begins, the crowd falls into a hush that's quickly broken by laughter, gasps, and the occasional heckle. The scribe tries to keep up, scratching down testimony with one hand and shooing away curious chickens with the other. The defense delivers an impassioned plea. Someone faints, usually at the mention of exorcism or sausage. And every so often, a dog breaks loose and charges the makeshift stage, adding a bit of chaos to the already unpredictable proceedings. By midday, the crowd is a swirling mix of debate, snack wrappers, and conflicting opinions about the appropriate fate for the accused. Grandmothers recall past trials. Remember the year of the weasel scandal? PT. While children are already planning reenactments for tomorrow's games, the verdict, when it finally comes, is met with cheers, groans, or, in rare cases, stunned silence, followed by a rush to the tavern to rehash every detail. As dusk falls and people begin to drift home, there's a sense of satisfaction in the air. Even if the goat is still unsure what just happened, the spectacle has served its purpose. Justice, such as it is, has been done. The community has been entertained. And, for a day at least, life has offered something more memorable than another muddy boot. So next time you hear someone complain that there's nothing to do, remember, once upon a time, all it took was a pig in court to bring the whole village together. Every so often, a day arrives when the usual rules of medieval animal trials get thrown out the window, along with everyone's dignity. For all the careful order, solemn proclamations, and stern-faced judges, sometimes the animals simply don't play along. Sometimes, against all odds, the tables turn. And when that happens, chaos follows close behind, led, most famously, by a goose with nothing left to lose. It begins as so many trials do, the town square packed to bursting, a breeze swirling the smells of hay and sweat, and the townsfolk jostling for a spot near the makeshift gallows. Today, the defendant is Gertrude, a goose with a reputation for biting fingers, chasing children, and, most recently, disrupting a wedding by waddling down the aisle and honking at the I-do. The crowd is ready for justice. The judge clears his throat, the prosecutor flourishes a bitten sandal for emphasis, and the defense offers a lukewarm plea for mercy, citing Gertrude's energetic personality. Gertrude, for her part, seems perfectly calm until the sentence is pronounced. This court finds the accused goose guilty of public nuisance, disorderly conduct, and interference in sacred affairs. The penalty: banishment from the village green and 1 month's confinement to the south pasture. The bailiff approaches, rope in hand, expecting an easy escort. That's when Gertrude makes her move. In an explosion of feathers and righteous fury, the goose breaks free, wings flapping and beak wide open. The bailiff, taken by surprise, stumbles backward, knocking over a barrel of cider. The scribe leaps onto a bench, shrieking as Gertrude makes a beeline for the judge's table, scattering parchment and upending the official seal. The crowd, at first stunned, erupts into a pandemonium of laughter, screams, and not a few cheers for the feathery fugitive. Children dive for cover. Elders shake their canes and demand order, but Gertrude is unstoppable. She circles the square, hissing at everyone in her path, before finally singling out the prosecutor, the very man who called her a menace to bread and public order. With a flurry of wings and some surprisingly strategic pecking, she leaves him hopping on 1 foot, waving his sandal in surrender. Justice, it seems, has a sense of irony. In the confusion, a group of sympathetic townsfolk, perhaps motivated by mischief or maybe by respect for Gertrude's gumption, form a human shield, shuffling the goose toward a gap in the crowd. The defense attorney, suddenly emboldened, loudly declares, "This is clearly a sign." The goose rejects the court's authority. A few drunks in the back begin chanting, "Freedom for Gertrude," as the priest mutters prayers for deliverance from poultry-related curses. When the dust finally settles, Gertrude has vanished. Rumor says she's living in a neighboring village, honored as a hero, or perhaps ruling over a band of outlaw ducks. The judge tries to restore order, but it's useless. The day's proceedings are over. The prosecutor limps home, the bailiff mops cider from his breeches, and the scribe spends the afternoon trying to recover the official seal from a puddle. In the days that follow, Gertrude's legend grows. The children turn her escape into a game. Adults recount her daring for years, and every troublesome goose is compared to her in hushed tones. Careful that one's got a bit of Gertrude in her. The verdict itself becomes a footnote, overshadowed by the day the goose bit back. Medieval justice, for all its spectacle and ceremony, is never quite as tidy as it wants to be. Sometimes, the accused refuse to play the villain. Sometimes, the system that's supposed to keep order gets upended by a pair of wings and a little bit of luck. And every so often, in a small corner of history, the goose gets the last laugh. For every headline-stealing case of pig executions and goat excommunications, there were those rare moments when an animal, against all odds, actually beat the rap. Yes, believe it or not every creature who faced the medieval justice system ended up hanged, banished, or grilled over a slow fire. Occasionally, the stars aligned, the judge was in a forgiving mood, or the defense actually remembered to mention that time the accused cow saved the village from a fire. The result? Acquittal, pardon, or the medieval equivalent of probation. Take, for example, the case of the lucky rooster. Accused of disturbing the peace and singing vespers with undue enthusiasm, this fowl's fate seemed sealed, until an unexpected champion stepped forward. Sister Agnes, the local nun. She argued passionately that the rooster's crowing helped her rise for early prayers and that, in fact, he was doing the Lord's work. The jury, perhaps swayed by piety or just eager to finish before sunset, voted to acquit. The rooster strutted home, head held high, crowing louder than ever, and the villagers spent the next month complaining about being woken before dawn. Then there's the saga of old Berta the cow. On trial for trespassing, property damage, and general stubbornness, Berta's defense was simple but effective. Her owner, a famously absent-minded shepherd, arrived at court with a cart full of cheese, gifts for the judge and jury. "A cow that produces such wonders cannot possibly be evil," he proclaimed. The court, overwhelmed by the prospect of fresh cheese, voted unanimously to pardon Berta. She was escorted back to her pasture amid cheers, and the next day cheese sales doubled at the market. Sometimes, all it took was a well-timed act of animal innocence. There's the tale of the piglet who, moments before sentencing, nuzzled up to the judge's granddaughter, who promptly declared, "He's my best friend." Faced with toddler tears and a courtroom full of witnesses, the judge caved, declaring the piglet rehabilitated by affection. The piglet was released into the care of the girl, where it went on to a scandal-free career of napping and occasionally stealing apples. In rare instances, the priest intervened, declaring that the animal's misdeeds were clearly a sign from above. "It is not the goose that sinned," declared Father Arnold after a particularly noisy service, "but the people who failed to feed her." With a sermon about the virtues of compassion, he convinced the court to let the goose go free, though, predictably, the next week, the goose was back on trial for eating the sacramental bread. At times, loopholes in the law worked in an animal's favor. If the judge or scribe made a mistake in the paperwork, wrong name, missing witness, or, in one case, confusing a goat with a sheep, the case could be dismissed on a technicality. While the villagers grumbled, most were secretly relieved not to endure another hour of testimony about bleating at improper times. And every so often, mercy was just mercy. A judge, exhausted by a long day, looked at the terrified defendant, a trembling rabbit accused of garden theft, and simply declared, "Let this one go." The villagers, sensing the day was done, applauded. The rabbit scampered off, and the story of its escape became the stuff of fireside legend. These rare acquittals are cherished and retold, proof that medieval justice wasn't all doom and gloom. In a world where the rules seemed stacked against animals, every so often kindness, or at least convenience, won out. And for every tragic tale of a pig at the gallows, there's a happy ending tucked between the hay bales. The cow who came home, the rooster who crowed on, and the rabbit who got away clean. After hours of courtroom chaos, flying feathers, and dramatic readings of animal misdemeanors, you might be left with a single burning question. Why did any of this happen? Why did entire communities rally to try a pig for murder, summon a priest to exorcise a goose, or formally banish a weevil with a signed decree? Was everyone simply bored? Or was there something deeper at work in these strange spectacles of medieval justice? At first glance, animal trials seem like pure absurdity, an overcooked stew of superstition, legal confusion, and a shortage of actual entertainment. But if you scratch the surface, you find a world where the line between people and animals was blurrier than you might expect. Medieval villagers lived cheek by jowl with their livestock. Pigs slept by the hearth, chickens under the table, cows lowed in the streets at dawn. These animals weren't just dinner on legs. They were working partners, neighbors, even rivals in the never-ending struggle for food and comfort. When disasters struck, failed harvests, mysterious illnesses, children bitten, crops devoured, something or someone had to take the blame. Animals, always underfoot and occasionally under suspicion, became the perfect scapegoats. Their trials allowed villagers to channel fear and frustration into ritual and performance. In a world full of uncertainty, dragging a goat before the court for public indecency gave a sense of control. If a dog bit a child, a public trial let the community grieve, rage, and eventually move on, feeling that justice, however odd, had been served. The theatre of animal trials also filled a social need. Medieval villages were close-knit places where everyone's business was everyone else's. The spectacle of a pig on trial, complete with witnesses, legal arguments, and a packed house, was a way to air grievances, settle scores, and reinforce community values. Who stole the cabbage? Who let the geese into the church? Who really started the fire? The courtroom became a safe space to argue, gossip, and, above all, laugh at the animal, at your neighbor, and sometimes at yourself. Then there's the religious angle. In a world where everything had spiritual meaning, animal crimes could be interpreted as signs from above or below. A sow that ate a child wasn't just dangerous, it was an omen. A rooster that laid an egg was seen as an agent of the devil. The church's involvement brought a layer of ritual and solemnity, transforming ordinary misfortunes into cosmic dramas where good and evil were literally on trial. But maybe the most important lesson is how resilient and inventive people can be. Faced with constant hardship, medieval communities didn't just complain. They built systems, however peculiar, to cope. Animal trials, as bizarre as they seem, gave people a way to make sense of the unpredictable world around them, to turn misfortune into a story, and to preserve a shred of order in lives that were anything but orderly. Of course, the logic didn't always hold up. No matter how many goats you put on trial, the rain still failed, the rats still came, and life went on. Over time, science and reason edged out superstition, and the last criminal pig shuffled out of the dock and into legend. Yet, the stories remain, reminders that history is often stranger, funnier, and more creative than we imagine. So, as you drift off tonight, ponder the lessons left behind by those old village courts. Sometimes, the most ridiculous rituals are born of real needs, connection, catharsis, and a sense that, no matter how weird things get, we're all muddling through together. And if the rooster crows at midnight, well, maybe he just wants to be heard. Sleep easy, knowing that history's strangest questions almost always have an answer, even if that answer is, why not? As the last embers of the medieval courtroom flicker out, you stretch your feet and let your mind drift forward in time. Imagine, for a moment, what it would look like if we revived the ancient tradition of animal trials today. Would your neighbor's Labrador be dragged before a judge for crimes against delivery men? Would the city pigeon be subpoenaed for unsanitary bombings on newly washed cars? The mind boggles, and, honestly, it's not much more absurd than some corners of modern life. Picture the courtroom. Sleek, air-conditioned, everyone in business, casual. At the defense table, a golden retriever sits beside its attorney, wagging hopefully and occasionally attempting to eat the court record. The prosecutor, eyes narrowed, accuses the dog of repeated offenses, excessive barking, destruction of garden gnomes, and public indecency involving an unfortunate mail carrier. The jury, half dog lovers and half cat enthusiasts, is hopelessly deadlocked before the trial even begins. Meanwhile, outside, a line of disgruntled cat owners waits their turn, clutching complaints about premeditated countersurfing, broken houseplants, and general aloofness. Inside the witness box, a parrot pleads the fifth, while the bailiff tries, unsuccessfully, to wrangle a pair of ferrets accused of racketeering in the sock drawer. The evidence, as always, is circumstantial. A mangled shoe, a suspiciously chewed TV remote, the testimony of a toddler who swears the hamster was an accomplice. Objection, Your Honor, the defense shouts, as the dog rolls over and offers its belly in an audacious plea for mercy. The judge, a seasoned professional with years of animal chaos at home, sighs and bangs the gavel, knowing this one will be harder to solve than most. Modern law, of course, doesn't actually put animals on trial. But sometimes, it feels like we're not so far removed from our medieval ancestors. After all, we still invent rituals to deal with the unpredictable. Insurance companies investigate squirrel-related power outages. News articles recount the exploits of infamous goats that escape local petting zoos, or pigeons that sabotage sports stadiums. We post videos of cats on trial in living rooms, solemnly declaring them guilty of general shenanigans before sentencing them to an afternoon in timeout. With treats, naturally. The instinct to find a culprit, even if it's just the family goldfish, is alive and well. We love to assign blame, to organize chaos, to laugh together at the ridiculous things our animal companions do. Maybe it's because, deep down, we understand what medieval villagers knew all along. Sometimes, life doesn't make sense, and it's better to turn disaster into a story than let it gnaw at you in the dark. If animal trials were revived today, you can picture the hashtags, number dog on trial trending worldwide, TV networks rushing in with live gavel-to-gavel coverage, and legal analysts arguing about the implications of letting a hamster take the stand. Think of the merchandise, the reenactments, the inevitable Netflix documentary. Trial by Terrier. Justice unleashed. But beyond the laughs, the idea still serves a purpose. It's a way to process mischief, to deal with accidents, to remind ourselves that nobody, human or animal, is perfect. We turn our daily frustrations into a kind of theater, gathering our families, and sometimes our pets, for judgment and, more importantly, forgiveness. We share the stories, we laugh at the absurdity, and we move on, together. So, as you pull the covers up, listening to your own house settling for the night, give a nod to your pets. No matter what trouble they've caused today, at least they're safe from medieval justice, and so are you. In the end, maybe the animal trials weren't just about blame, but about belonging. And that, more than anything, is what makes life, past or present, a little less lonely and a lot more human. Sleep well, and may your dreams be free of suspicious footprints, missing socks, and any roosters plotting midnight mischief. There's something both inspiring and slightly alarming about a medieval jury. On the one hand, justice is in the hands of your peers. On the other, those peers are the same people who watched you fall into a puddle last Tuesday and haven't stopped telling the story since. For animal trials, the system is even more democratic. The village gathers, ale flows freely, and suddenly everyone is an expert on criminal chickens. Welcome to the medieval jury system. Local, lively, and occasionally lubricated. It all begins with selection. Forget the letter in the mail or solemn oaths of impartiality. Here, being chosen for jury duty is as simple as standing in the square at the wrong time or catching the judge's eye when he's hungry for a break. The blacksmith is always in because he's impossible to argue with. The baker's wife insists on her seat because she's still mad about last year's weevil debacle. Farmer Jonas usually shows up late, clutching a tankard, but is welcomed anyway. He's got stories. Once assembled, the jurors take their places on a rough bench that lists to the left and smells faintly of cider. There are no rules about food or drink, so a steady stream of ale, bread, and gossip moves through the ranks. Someone starts a betting pool. Will the pig be acquitted? Will the goose bite the judge? How long before the scribe falls asleep? The odds are discussed as seriously as any legal point. The judge, in theory, guides the jury. In practice, he spends half his time shushing them and the other half trying to stop old Marta from explaining that, in her day, goats knew their place. Testimony begins, but it's hard to hear over the clink of mugs and the rising buzz of debate. Farmer Jonas interrupts the prosecution to complain about the price of oats. The baker's wife swears the accused cow winked at her. The blacksmith claims to have seen the pig practicing escape drills behind the barn. It's less court proceeding, more village meeting with a strong undercurrent of pub brawl. Yet, somehow, the jury system works. If you define works loosely, every grievance finds a voice. Every feud is aired. And by the time the final arguments are made, even the quietest juror has weighed in on the pressing issue of whether ducks can truly be rehabilitated. Decisions are rarely unanimous. Arguments rage about precedent. Remember the trial of the three-legged rooster? And about which animals are trustworthy. You can't trust a sheep, not after what happened in '62. When it comes time to deliberate, the jurors shuffle outside for privacy, which mostly means more ale. Under the shade of the old oak, the debate continues with even less structure. Votes are cast by raised hands, by loud cheers, or, when things get especially contentious, by flipping a crust of bread. Occasionally, the scribe is called in to break a tie, usually by accident when he's just looking for his lost quill. Finally, the verdict is reached. The jury stumbles back in, faces flushed, confidence high. The foreman, usually whoever can still stand straight, declares the result with great pomp. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of turnip theft, but not of conspiracy to commit cabbage mischief. Cheers and boos erupt, depending on which side bet what. The judge bangs his stick, the jury returns to the crowd, and someone immediately starts planning the next round of drinks. The system may be imperfect, chaotic, rowdy, fueled by bread and beer, but it's a reflection of the village itself. Flawed, funny, and endlessly human, justice, medieval style, is a group effort. If nothing else, it guarantees that the story will be retold, with growing embellishments, for many drunken nights to come. And if you're an animal on trial, well, hope for a sympathetic juror and bring snacks. The trial pauses for a crucial moment. It's time to examine the alibi. Modern courts might call for forensics, expert testimony, maybe a security camera. Medieval justice? Not quite so advanced. Here, the investigation is mostly a matter of who shouts the loudest, whose memory is longest, and whether the accused animal can count on a sympathetic witness. And so, the courtroom braces for an onslaught of dubious statements, wild theories, and the kind of logic only possible after 3 pints of small beer. It starts with the defense's dramatic announcement. We call the witness for the accused. The crowd rustles. Could it be the mayor? The priest? No. Up waddles the farm dog, tail wagging, eyes bright, clearly more interested in belly rubs than sworn testimony. Speak, noble hound, the defense intones, trying to maintain dignity as the dog promptly lies down and begins licking its own paw. The scribe notes, witness uncooperative, probable bias. Next comes little Ing, a barefoot village child with a freckled face and more imagination than sense. She testifies, with absolute certainty, that she saw the accused cow sitting politely by the river at the hour of the alleged turnip theft. She even sang me a lullaby, Inga adds, to the judge's raised eyebrow and the jury's stifled laughter. Still, in a system where evidence is optional and storytelling is a competitive sport, her word counts for something. The prosecution objects, citing excessive cuteness, overruled. The baker, summoned for his reliable witness status, manages to muddle things further. I'm sure I saw the pig near my bakery at dawn. Or was it the blacksmith's pig? Maybe it was Tuesday. Or was it raining? His testimony dissolves into a heated debate about the weather last week and whether it's ever been possible to tell one pig from another. The jury shrugs. The judge doodles in the margin. Occasionally, someone claims to have found physical evidence. "Behold!" shouts Farmer Eric, producing a clump of suspiciously muddy wool. This was found at the scene of the crime. The defense counters that all the sheep look muddy. And anyway, wool gets around. The scribe dutifully writes, Exhibit A, wool. Origin, uncertain. Smells of onions. Sometimes the animal's own behavior is offered as proof. Would a guilty goat nap so peacefully in court? Asks the defense, pointing at the defendant, who is, in fact, fast asleep and snoring gently. Look at that innocence. The crowd nods, some convinced, others just glad the goat isn't currently eating the evidence. When pressed for more rigorous investigation, the villagers improvise. They retrace hoofprints in the mud, though every track eventually vanishes into a bog or someone's boot. They debate loudly over whether the rooster crowed at midnight or just before, and whether it matters at all. The priest chimes in with a warning about bearing false witness, though even he seems to enjoy the unfolding spectacle. The highlight, inevitably, is the parade of character witnesses. The cow's best friend, a sheep, the pig's neighbor, a donkey, and even a surprisingly articulate goose are marched before the court, each making their case in their own inimitable way. Their testimonies are translated, interpreted, and, when they honk, bray, or oink at the wrong moment, mostly ignored. In the end, the medieval alibi is less about facts and more about feeling. If enough people believe the animal is innocent, or if the witnesses are charming enough, the jury might be swayed. And if not, well, at least everyone had a good story to share at supper. The system is rickety, subjective, and gloriously unreliable. But in a world without forensics, DNA, or lie detectors, sometimes the best you can hope for is a neighbor's word, a muddy piece of wool, and a very well-behaved dog. The sentence is carried out. The crowd drifts away, still buzzing about the day's entertainment. The judge stretches his legs. The scribe packs up his parchment. The priest goes to air out his vestments, which, thanks to the defendant, now smell suspiciously like goat. But as the dust settles, one group is left behind in the long shadow of medieval justice, the animal's family. In a world where every barnyard is a small, interconnected society, the repercussions of a trial don't end with the ringing of the bell. Take, for example, the pig found guilty of cabbage theft and sentenced to banishment. The rest of the sty, siblings, cousins, maybe a distant uncle pig, don't quite understand what's happened. They notice the absence, the empty corner of straw, the way scraps are now shared among fewer snouts. There's a vague sense of unease. One piglet, born with a flair for drama, paces restlessly, as if waiting for the accused to waddle back and explain everything. Pigs, after all, are social creatures. Losing a member of the family can change the entire mood of the pen. For the owner, the fallout can be much worse. If the convicted animal was a prize breeder or a particularly productive hen, there's an immediate economic hit. Suddenly, next season's piglets or eggs are in doubt. You might try to reassure the rest of the animals, but it's hard to make a speech when half your flock is busy looking for turnips under the fence. And then there's the matter of reputation. The family of the convicted animal might find themselves the subject of new suspicion. There goes Marta. Her rooster was hanged for heresy last year, whispers one neighbor. Keep an eye on her geese. Sometimes, the rest of the animals suffer for the crimes of their kin. If a goat is caught leading a vegetable heist, the remaining goats may be moved to a shabbier pen, kept under stricter watch. Or, in extreme cases, all sent to another farm. Chickens from a criminal line are watched for rebellious behavior. You might even hear a farmer threaten, "Don't make me take you to court, like your brother," to a particularly stubborn ox. There are even emotional consequences, or what passes for them in the medieval imagination. Folk tales speak of cows lowing mournfully for days after their calf is exiled, of horses going off their feed after their stablemate is convicted of fence breaking. Children sometimes sneak out to comfort a lonely goat, or toss an extra crust of bread to the bereaved piglets. They miss their family, the children insist, and whether or not the adults believe it, they're secretly glad for the excuse to be kinder, at least for a few days. The family of the accused sometimes rallies together, forming a tight-knit band of outcasts. Other animals, perhaps sensing weakness or simply enjoying a shake-up in the pecking order, assert themselves, taking the best straw or elbowing to the front at feeding time. There is barnyard politics, shifting alliances, and, inevitably, fresh scandals to distract from the old. By next week, the ducks are on trial for making too much noise at sunrise, and the goats' misdeeds are yesterday's news. Yet, the memory lingers. Every so often, when the moon is bright and the night is quiet, the animals huddle a little closer, as if warding off the spectre of the law. The farmer, too, locks the gate more carefully, whispers a quiet apology for the world's unfairness, and wonders if next season will be gentler. In the end, life in the barnyard moves on, battered but not broken. The next harvest comes, new piglets are born, and the memory of the trial fades to legend. Still, for those left behind, animal or human, every missing snout, every empty perch is a reminder that justice, medieval style, has a long reach and a longer memory. In the pantheon of medieval criminal masterminds, rats and weevils hold a special, itchy place. While pigs and goats might make a spectacle when the town's food is threatened by vermin, the stakes are higher and the logic even stranger. Welcome to the bizarre world of pest court, where the accused are too small to show up, the prosecutor is deadly serious, and the verdict is almost always guilty as charged. The problem starts, as always, with a bad harvest. Grain stores are found crawling with weevils, bread bins are suspiciously light, and the cat seems to have lost interest in her usual patrols. The villagers gather, noses wrinkled, and demand action. "It's the rats again," someone cries, "and the weevils, they're multiplying." The priest shakes his head. The miller curses his luck. The town elders murmur, remembering the great mouse plague of 36. Since chasing every rat is hopeless and squashing every weevil is an exercise in futility, the village turns to its most trusted solution: the law. A summons is issued. The town scribe, barely concealing a smirk, pens a formal complaint. Let it be known that all rats and weevils within these boundaries are hereby ordered to appear before the honourable court to answer for crimes of theft, property destruction, and general impudence. Copies are nailed to doorposts, grain bins, and, for good measure, the church door. Trial day arrives, and the villagers crowd into the courthouse. The judge, looking more bemused than usual, takes his seat. The prosecutor delivers a passionate speech about the sanctity of our bread and the right to peaceful flour. On the defense bench sits the village friar, once again called upon to represent the unrepresented. He clears his throat, prepares a few words on creaturely necessity, and waits for the inevitable. The proceedings are as solemn as any pig trial, at least until the witnesses are called. Farmer Elsie testifies that she caught a rat red-pawed in the oats. The baker claims to have seen 2 rats, possibly 3, fleeing the scene of the crime. The children insist they found weevils in the porridge, and even the priest has a story about a particularly bold mouse that nibbled the altar cloth. For the prosecution, the evidence is overwhelming. Empty bins, gnawed sacks, and a population of pests that seems to double every moon. The defense, outnumbered and outgunned, tries for mercy. Rats and weevils are only following their nature, the friar pleads. Is there not enough grain for all? His arguments fall on unsympathetic ears. Food is scarce, and tempers are short. The judge, consulting the ancient records, finds plenty of precedent for vermin on trial. In the year of our Lord 1412, the rats of Chalon-sur-Saône were summoned and found wanting, he intones. When it's time for the accused to appear, things get creative. Rituals are held, bells rung, curses read, holy water sprinkled in the corners of the granary. The official sentence is issued. All rats and weevils are hereby banished from the village, on pain of excommunication and pestilential doom. Naturally, the vermin do not comply. But for a brief moment, the villagers feel better, united by the spectacle and the shared hope that justice, if not effective, is at least entertaining. Some say the rats grow more brazen after their conviction, as if mocking the system. Others insist that, for a night or two, the granary feels a little safer. The scribe writes it all down, even as a weevil crawls across his page. In the end, Pest Court is less about results and more about ritual, a way to cope with the endless, invisible enemies of medieval life. After all, sometimes you just need to shout at the darkness, slap a fine on a weevil, and tell the world you did everything you could. And as you drift off to sleep, you might still hear the distant scurrying in the rafters, a reminder that, in Pest Court, the appeal never really ends. In the medieval justice system, the condemned, whether pig, goose, or goat, rarely have much to say about their fate. But for all the chaos and absurdity, the ritual of the last meal and the granting of final words, such as they are, form a peculiar, touching end to the spectacle. It's a moment when even the sternest judge softens, the executioner sighs, and the villagers, full of judgment and gossip, pause to wonder if, just maybe, animals deserve a little dignity. It begins after sentencing, when the crowd starts to thin and the sunlight slants through the dusty air. The condemned animal is led aside, sometimes to a quiet corner of the barn, sometimes to a shady spot beneath the old linden tree. The judge, following custom, asks the owner if there's any final request. A pail of fresh slop for the pig, comes one answer. One last mouthful of barley for the goose. In rare, sentimental cases, the whole village chips in, tossing extra carrots, apples, or bits of crust, until the animal is surrounded by a small, impromptu feast. For a few minutes, everyone's a little less judge and a little more generous. Children press close, hoping for a final pat or perhaps a miracle reprieve. Old women mutter prayers and recall stories of animals pardoned at the last second. Someone always insists, "Well, at least it got a good meal, better than most of us." The condemned animal, of course, is more interested in eating than philosophical reflection, but there's an unmistakable gentleness in the way it savors each bite. The last words are a trickier affair. The defense, not to be outdone by custom, stands up and delivers a speech in the animal's name. "If I, pig, have offended, let my bacon serve as warning to all who would root in forbidden gardens." The scribe records these final statements with a flourish, never missing an opportunity for a joke in the margins. Goose requested less honking in the afterlife. Pig confessed to nothing. There are cases where the animal's behavior is taken as a sign. A rooster that crows one last time is said to be protesting its innocence. A sheep that nuzzles its owner is, some claim, making peace with its fate. Sometimes, the priest offers a blessing or a prayer, just in case the animal's soul, or at least its reputation, is headed somewhere important. The village children are encouraged to show kindness, if only for this moment, as if mercy might linger long enough to outlast the day. The final meal and words are a kind of balm, not just for the accused, but for everyone watching. In a world that is often harsh and unpredictable, these little rituals offer a sliver of grace. They give the villagers permission to be kind, to remember that the animal on trial was, after all, just doing what animals do. There's comfort in the predictability. A last bite, a last word, a moment of collective reflection before the sentence is carried out. Afterward, as the sun sinks lower and the crowd disperses, people take home more than gossip. For a while, the barn is quieter, the fields emptier. The owner might slip an extra treat to the next animal, just in case. And around the hearth that night, the story is retold, sometimes with a tear, sometimes with a laugh, always with a sense that, if only for a moment, everyone was a little more human. In the end, the animal's rights are modest: a final meal, a few kind words, and a story that will outlast them. It's not much, but in the world of medieval justice, it's everything. So, as tonight's candle flickers low and the last echoes of the rooster's testimony fade, let's take a moment to appreciate the ridiculous, determined, and slightly smoky resilience of our medieval ancestors and, apparently, their livestock. You've survived another journey through a world where justice wasn't just blind, but occasionally cross-eyed and carrying a bucket of turnips, where entire villages gathered to watch a goat on trial for crimes against cabbage, where lawyers argued for the innocence of a pig and priests attempted to exorcise chickens, and where, sometimes, a locust could be exiled for eating the wrong crop at the wrong time. It's easy to laugh at a world where animals stood in the dock, but let's be honest. If your neighbor's goat ate your garden, you'd want justice too. Medieval people were trying their best with what they had. Faith, superstition, a sense of humor, and more than a little desperation. They built systems, even if those systems involved cows as defendants and ducks as public menaces, because community meant finding ways to explain the unexplainable, and maybe, deep down, to give everyone something to talk about over the long winter. So tonight, as you tuck yourself into a bed that no pig will ever be executed for stealing, take a moment to feel grateful for central heating, modern law, and the fact that your dog's worst crime is chewing your slippers, not standing trial for heresy. Be glad you don't need to bribe a jury of your neighbors every time your cat knocks something over at 3 a.m. History may be absurd, and sometimes even tragic, but it's also proof that people, and apparently a surprising number of farm animals, are stubborn, hopeful, and endlessly inventive, often in the most ridiculous ways. Now breathe deep. Let the day's worries drift away, and know that, in the grand scheme of things, you have already survived far stranger nights than this. Sleep well, and may all your dreams be free of suspicious pigs, vengeful geese, and the world's weirdest courtrooms. Good night.